For the better part of a century, women have played a starring role in American society's ongoing drama, that is consumption. Since even before the turn of the century, the female consumer has been responsible for over 85% of household purchases. And in addition to their position of power within the engine room of the economy, women have served as cultural icons in art, politics, and advertising. They have become symbols of peace, home life, and glamour. The 20th century saw female kind shift their role from isolated domestics to major business, political, and social players. And through all of the years, and all of the cultural revolutions, advertising has served as a record of both how the world sees women and how women are supposed to see themselves.
Like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Everybody knows. Na, 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 na.
The turn of the 20th century heralded an era where abundance of possessions went from being a product of one's own manufacture to one of the purse. Women learned to buy rather than make. Advertising educated them in the rituals of self-transformation through cosmetics and clothing, and hypnotized them with the promise of shopping within the maze of newly built department stores. Being gifted in the art of bargaining for bulk goods became obsolete, with the ability to comprehend competing claims of brand merchandise now the necessary skill. The minds of the newly born advertising industry conjured up a stereotype of beauty for women to try and transform themselves into, whilst at the same time convincing them that their true place in life was in their home, their true purpose to make it an idyllic and pristine environment for the rest of the family. Advertising was fast becoming the manual from which women were supposed to live their lives. The 1920s brought to those that could afford them an array of exciting new things to spend their money on. Jazz, international fashions, and household comforts. And with these new products came a new way of selling. Advertisers had learned to encase their products in the golden glow of dreams. Instead of selling a product based purely on its own attributes, it was now the norm to show how glamorous a person could look and feel by using that product. Advertisers focused more on the consumer and less on the thing they were trying to sell. Many ads at the time showed powerful images of active women in control of their lives, an acknowledgement of their newly won power and freedom in being able to vote, and also for the first time finding themselves making up over 1/3 of the workforce. However, advertising still urged even the most independent of females to pursue the domestic skills it had been telling them were their greatest asset for over a quarter of a century. The 1920s confirmed one elemental truth. The consumer was most definitely a she.
Times have changed, and we've often rewound the clock.
The Great Depression spawned a culture desperate to escape the hopelessness of daily life. Advertisers tried desperately to energize a deflated market by tapping into people's emotions through the use of human tragedy, humor, and even sexual innuendo. Everything from chewing gum to toilet paper was being thrown at the consumer in a desperate bid to keep the economy going. And, as the consumer was still viewed to be very much a woman, they were the ones that advertising had targeted firmly in its crosshairs when the bombardment finally began.
Anything goes.
The 1940s, and whilst Europe was being torn apart by the endless carnage of World War II, American manufacturing output was in full swing. Wartime propaganda, through the use of advertising, encouraged women to leave the home and head to the factories, where they were told that they should labor for family and country, rather than personal status and individual wealth. At the height of the war, almost 20 million women worked outside the home. One of these women was Rosie the Riveter. Based on real-life aircraft factory worker Roswell Monroe, Rosie the Riveter went on to become perhaps the most widely recognized icon of the era. The films and posters she appeared in were used as a way to encourage women to go to work in support of the war effort. But it wasn't just the war effort that benefited from the use of Rosie as a rallying point. It is said that she also inspired a social movement that increased the number of working American women by nearly 60% between 1940 and 1944. Rosie, and women like her, proved to themselves, as well as the country, that they could do a man's job, and that they could do it well. Furthermore, it has been suggested that the scenario of women, both black and white, working together during this period led to the breaking down of social barriers and a healthy celebration of diversity. But as much as the women of the early 1940s were seen to be taking a step forward in terms of how the world saw them, come the end of the war and the return of the male presence to the everyday workforce, advertising reverted to its old ways.
Her hair is soft and her eyes are oh so blue.
With a new decade came an old mindset, with advertising once again showing the female role as one primarily suited to the home. It portrayed a woman's everyday life as one full of romance, personal conflict, and family life. The 50s saw advertisers embrace the way of thinking that their pre-1920s counterparts had done so religiously, idealizing the domestic environment where the democracy of the American nuclear family could feel safe against the threat of Cold War communism, with women serving as its guardian and defender. By doing this, advertising further separated the worlds of men and women, placing them back into the compartments they had existed within prior to the onset of World War II. Men in the commercial world where goods were produced, and women in the home where those same goods were consumed. Television became a potent weapon in the advertiser's arsenal, delivering to a huge new audience the post-war American dream in all of its white picket-fenced, consumer-saturated glory. However, amongst a sea of similar products, the advertising industry struggled to catch the sometimes unpredictable eye of a powerful female market, still caught in the memory of the previous decade's progress towards equality in the world. The women that advertisers created to sell their wares were often artificial and exaggerated creatures, failing to accurately represent their real-life counterparts in every way possible.
One, two, three, four!
The 60s quickly became known as the era of sex, youth, and liberation, and advertising was quick to make the most of this new cultural revolution. The females of the 1960s were tempted with looks of uniqueness and a bolder range of beauty, from the waif to the voluptuous, from the sophisticated to the slightly mischievous. Power and freedom was the promise advertising made to its followers, traits exemplified by the housewife of the era, one whose new domestic domain existed in the heavens above the old one, the stewardess. Combining the wardrobe of a sex kitten, the flair of a chef, the nurturing instinct of a mother, and the independence of the 1940s working girl, she was the female standard bearer of the time. By comparison, the needs of the old standard bearer, the traditional housewife, were largely ignored in the wake of advertising's persistence that women should be sexy, stay sexy, and, if possible, get even sexier. Something the consumer world's former poster girl was seen simply not to be. As had been the case in the previous decade, 70s advertising continued to use popular culture as its focal point, and in doing so, finally had to acknowledge the fact that the female form, still its biggest consumer, indeed came in a variety of shapes and skin tones. Acknowledgement that only went so far. For, by and large, the advertised colour and appearance of success and glamour was still shown to be white and slender. The working world of the 70s woman, so rapidly on the ascendancy in reality, appeared seldom in the fantasy landscape of advertising, and when it did, it was from a schizophrenic viewpoint. The professional woman was either plain Jane or gorgeous Georgie. This was a decade of severe social transition for women, and advertisers took it upon themselves to highlight the pitfalls of trying to balance the demands of a family with those of a career, with the women of the 1970s advertising world shown to be repeatedly on the verge of some sort of domestic catastrophe, saved only in the nick of time by one form of packaged and branded product or another. The celebration of the era's natural look was actually a lesson in false advertising, with the Farrah Fawcett windswept hairstyle nothing more than the product of painstaking lacquering, its permatan counterpart, the result of strategically placed lycra. The last 2 decades of the 20th century saw the traditional techniques of advertisers seemingly reach the end of their effectiveness, with the consumer seemingly a victim of both weariness and wariness with regard to what they saw being placed before them. And so in desperation, advertisers decided to try something new, something bold. By showing the female point of view to be something similar to that of a man's, as seen in Revlon's hugely successful Charlie campaign, many advertisers were forced to more accurately consider feminist sensibilities when coming up with ways in which to sell their products. The scale of feminine beauty and success widened throughout the 1980s and carried on into the 1990s, causing advertisers to expand its target market to those of greater age, different ethnicity, and varied accomplishment. However, advertising's prevailing model of beauty remained young and emaciated. Cue the arrival of the supermodel. No longer simply satisfied with using these goddesses of female form to promote the latest catwalk fashions, advertisers took it upon themselves to use these women to promote anything and everything, from upmarket high street fashion to conservation issues, to music videos such as George Michael's Freedom 90, to even simply selling themselves, the supermodel brand. By placing the idea of what the perfect woman should look like so far above and beyond what most other women were capable of achieving, advertisers ensured that their consumer market would only try harder to reach this impossible goal. Today's advertising displays some of the most provocative images imaginable, with women at the forefront of the marketing industry's drive to catch the consumer's eye through whatever means necessary. Sexual liberation and variety of culture and ethnicity, so very cutting edge in the 60s, and so very frowned upon at any time up until that point, is now commonplace in the advertising world, with very few adverts these days containing anything but good-looking and alluring people selling the world everything from bras to baby food. Also commonplace, where once it was so strikingly lacking, is representation of the male consumer, whose 21st century needs match those of their female counterparts step for step. Building on the tried and trusted methods of the previous century's three-pronged magazine, television, and billboard advertising attack, 21st century technology now allows the consumer to be reached in ways not even remotely thought of 100 years before. There isn't a single aspect of daily life, male or female, black or white, that isn't free of the influence of advertising. But, as far as the world of the consumer has come, thanks in no small part to the efforts, and in some cases, exploitation of women, there are still some demographics that are neglected in modern American advertising, such as the overweight and those of homosexual preference. But just maybe, in another 100 years, they too will enjoy the same commercial representation that their heterosexual and optimally weighted counterparts do today, perhaps producing champions of their own to fight for a recognition it took the women of the world the better part of a century to achieve.
You gotta be prepared.